Well, hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. And I've made all sorts of videos over the last 4 years or so about all sorts of different cars. But one of the cars that is on my wish list, if I could have a collection of 20 of the most amazing cars in the world for me, this would be one of them. This is an absolute favorite of mine. The Ferrari Daytona is a favorite of mine anyway. But the convertible version, the Spider, is the icing on the cake. I actually prefer, if there's a closed car or an open car, apart from any sort of structural compromises that have to be made because there's no roof, I generally will always go for the open car because I think it's more of a visceral experience driving with the wind in the hair, as it were. But this is actually not a genuine Ferrari Daytona Spider. It's a genuine Ferrari Daytona, but it's one of the chop-top cars, as they were known. But a lot of them, the vast majority of them, were done to a high standard. Some of them were not, but the vast majority of them were done very well, almost indistinguishable from the 121 or 122, if you include the prototype, production Daytona Spiders. The chassis on this car, the underpinnings are actually quite ancient. The 250 GT, which was the staple of Ferrari right up till 1965, I think. It was a ladder frame chassis, like the sort of thing you put up against the side of your house to paint your walls with, and it actually had front independent suspension, so each suspension system was autonomous, and then you had a live rear axle flailing about, trying to keep up with the bumps on the road underneath the car. That was the Ferrari 250 GT, and of course in GTO guise it actually was a world beater, and Ferrari had no trouble selling 250 GTs because they had the beautiful V12 Colombo engine, most of them, or a Lampredi engine, and the package worked, but there was just one small problem. It was called Lamborghini, and Lamborghini came along in 1963 with the 350 GT, which did not have a live rear axle. It had independent back suspension for better ride and handling, and it also had a 4-camshaft V12. So the idea of this was that it provided better breathing for the engine. You could get more gas through it because the camshafts were optimally positioned above the valves, the inlets and the exhaust valves, to get the air through the combustion chamber as quickly as possible. I know this is common knowledge, but just laying the foundations really. And Ferrari soldiered on with a more straightforward design of engine, the single overhead cam design of engine, right up until, I think, 1966, the Ferrari 275 GTB. They then went on to the Ferrari 275 GTB4, which was simply a matter of taking, I'm oversimplifying, but taking the racing technology, the 4-cam engines of the P3 and P4, etc., and copying and pasting those onto a road car. And that's what they did. And the 275 GTB was still a world beater. The 4-cam is one of my favorite cars as well. I've had some epic drives in 4-cam 275s, including occasions when the throttle stuck open on one. That led to a very interesting situation, which I will not expand on here, but it ended okay, but it was very close. Then the development of that, but it was still, the technology was still sort of just catching up with Lamborghini by that time. And then Lamborghini brought out the Miura, which was cutting edge in just about every way possible. Styling, engineering, you had a 4-cam engine, but just because they could, Gianpaolo Dallara, the brilliant engineer who was the head of engineering at Lamborghini, made the Miura block integral with the gearbox and differential in one casting. As you do, it's hardly ever been done before or since. It was seriously off the scale in terms. Can you imagine the responsibility of having a cylinder block with a gearbox and differential in one lump of magnesium or electron or aluminium, and you've got the last machining operation to do on it? Can you imagine the responsibility? So Ferrari, like all other car manufacturers, separated engine, gearbox, differential, except the gearbox and diff on this are actually one unit, and they're at the back. So enter the Ferrari Daytona in 1968, 1969. Enzo Ferrari was expected to do something amazing. He'd launched the Dino, the mid-engine Dino, the baby Ferrari, which he didn't call a Ferrari because he was frightened it would be a sales failure. He was frightened the V6 engine in the Dino would take away from the kudos and halo effect of the V12s, incorrectly, because the Dino is a very loved model, but it's still contentious as to whether it should be called a Ferrari or not. I've covered that in previous videos. This is definitely a Ferrari. It's got the ladder frame, it's got the independent suspension. Ferrari had actually woken up and put independent suspension on their cars, as I say, in the previous generation, the 275. The engine is here, and it's almost a mid-mounted front engine car. So the majority of the engine and its weight particularly is within the front track. It's within the wheelbase, which makes for better handling. And also they used what's called a transaxle at the back end. So the gearbox and differential are actually located between the back wheels, and you have a solid tube connecting everything together called a torque tube that runs down the middle of the car. Works ever so well. In fact, it works so well, Porsche reproduced it almost exactly for the 928 and then the 924 and 944. So that they copied and pasted, again to use that expression, Ferrari's technology, and they used it starting in 1975, I think, with the 928. But the amazing thing is, I mean, this car was criticized hugely when it came out by the motoring press as, Iain, we've seen this before. He's still building these ladder frames. Yes, we've got independent back suspension. We've got the engine in the front and the gearbox in the back. So for ideal weight distribution and to get some weight over the back wheels to help with traction. But it's oh so old-fashioned. It's the same thing warmed over again. It's a 275 GTB on steroids. Whereas in Sant'Agata Bolognese, a few kilometers down the road, they're turning out Miuras, which are radical. So at first glance, this appeared to be a car that was already passé at the point it was launched. But the reality is quite different, because this car was, not only was it a complete departure for Ferrari styling-wise, and I love the shape of these. And I actually think the Spider looks even better than the Berlinetta, the coupe. This is, as I say, this is one of my favorite cars, so this is not a difficult video for me to make, really. But once motoring journalists started to get behind the wheel of Daytonas, the steering wheel, they realized that these cars were something special, and that they were able to fight the Ferrari fight. Out of the box, these were sort of the fastest production car in the world. What a Miura could really get up to in the real world is a moot point, probably 170 miles an hour. These were 174, and that was done by Autocar, Motor, Road and Track. All the respected car magazines came up with the same figures. And to my knowledge, these were standard cars. They weren't breathed upon or modified. It was a 352 brake horsepower, this 4.4 litre V12 out of the box, and the figures at the time were staggering. 174 miles an hour, top speed, and 0 to 60 in 5.4 seconds, which was very fast for that time. But also, the car is eminently drivable. I mean, I've had the pleasure of working on and driving many, many Daytonas over the last 40 years. The first one I got in for work was 39 years ago. And they are just wonderful to drive. They're very stable at high speed. If you're doing 80 whatever miles an hour in this car, and you think a lot of cars at that speed, E-Type Jaguars, dare I say it, you think, oh my goodness, what would this be like at twice this speed? I'd be struggling to keep it on the road. Not with one of these. They are well planted. If the wheel geometry is set up properly, they are rock steady on the road, and they feel as though they'll do 174 miles an hour all day long. And they are so it's a trade-off. At first it appeared, oh no, more, but actually on the road they are pretty spectacular. We have another Daytona here at the moment, a plexiglass car. There is a difference. The front end, as designed by Leonardo Fioravanti, was a piece of plastic with 4 headlamps behind it and some incredibly clever lines over it. The American regulations, the lighting regulations, said A, the lights have to be of a certain height, which these weren't on the plexiglass cars, and B, they had to have nothing in front of them in terms of shrouds or extra layers of glass or whatever for aerodynamics. That's why Jaguar went with the E-Type to open headlights instead of closed, as we covered in the last video. And that's why they came out with the pop-up lights, because when they're up, the headlight is there. It's actually at a higher height than it was when they were the original plexiglass fixed lights. So Pininfarina came up with this incredibly elegant front end design, which I actually think looks better than the plexiglass, if I'm being honest. The other thing is, this was from the factory quite often painted silver, this strip here. And that looked quite good too. It was just a styling device. You hardly ever see pop-up headlight Daytonas with their silver across the front, but a lot of them did leave the factory like that to look like the plexiglass cars. The more astute of you will already have noticed that this car is on wire wheels, Baranis, which were a factory optional extra on the Daytona over the 5-spoke sort of signature mag alloy wheels that Ferrari used at the time. This was the last Ferrari that was factory available with wire wheels, and they were sort of there was a tipping point where they were getting reluctant to let customers have them. And that was because cars were growing and they were getting more powerful. And the loadings in terms of sideways G-force, acceleration and braking was almost too much for the Barani wire wheels. The spokes were getting more and more stressed, and they needed to be retuned, the spokes on the wheels, quite often to keep them in proper fettle. And it was for that reason that this was the last car you could actually buy wire wheels on as an optional extra from Ferrari. Aston Martin did the same thing with the DBS. The V8 went on to the alloy wheels, the GKN alloy wheels, which they had for many years after that. But the 6-cylinder Aston Martin DBS, you could still get with wire wheels on it. In fact, I think they were standard. But again, the transformation from the 6-cylinder DBS, which was a 145 mile an hour car, to the V8, which was a 160 mile an hour car, whoosh, no wire wheels, couldn't cope with the power. So that's why these have them. And for my money, I think they look absolutely magnificent with the Barani wheels on. Again, the rear wheels, they weren't an option on this car, I don't think. But they became available on the 512 Berlinetta Boxer from about 1976, 77. You could get 9-inch rear wheels, and a lot of people have retrofitted them on the back of Daytonas to make them look more meaty at the back end. In fact, I think the other one we've got here has got 9-inch rear wheels on it, and they're quite a popular upgrade to make the car look a bit more meaty. The other reason for people put 9-inch rear wheels on is if the bodywork has been restored at the back not fantastically well, the 9-inch rear wheels actually camouflage the fact that the body is a bit wider than it should be and has a bit more overhang and looks a bit like a 1990s Japanese car. where the wheels are almost too small for the car. So people, if you see 9-inch rear wheels on a Daytona, they've either been fitted out of enthusiasm or out of deception, one or the other. So this car is largely a lovely car. It's been with us for a while, having some work done. The steering column stalk assembly, lights, wipers, indicators. Actually, rather alarmingly, when we were working on the car one day, we connect the batteries up when we're working on them and tend to disconnect them when we're not. Connected it up, and all of a sudden there were wisps of smoke and rather unpleasant odors coming from the steering column. And it turned out that the actual combination switch was burning out. It was burning itself to pieces. So off with the battery terminal, and we've actually fitted a new combination stalk assembly, which is not an easy job because they're not the same. It's not like for like. Anyway, Pete's done it. That's all finished, but this car has a running fault. It's not running on 12 cylinders, and I'm going to do some investigating as to why that is. So that's my next job. We're going to see if we can coax this car into life and get it running on 12 cylinders. One thing to note about these chop-top Daytonas, the profile of the rear wing, where the rear deck, the boot lid, meets the rear wing, can be quite different. And the conversions, it was economically viable to convert a Berlinetta into a Spider in the 80s and the 90s, because the Spiders were worth, even the non-original ones, were worth more than a standard Berlinetta. That's changed now because we live in a more puritanical world with regard to Ferraris, so the chop-top cars are a bit more, dare I say, frowned upon than they were. The original 121 or 122, if you include the prototype factory Spiders, are still venerated and worth multi-millions of pounds. But these were the Spider conversions were done by Mike Sheehan in California, Autocraft in the UK. I think Strayman was in California as well. And that's probably others, but I can't just remember them at the moment. There's 3 or 4 companies around the world who would gladly convert your accident damaged or Berlinetta that wasn't accident damaged into a Spider. Nowadays, they're sort of worth the same as a Berlinetta. So this is worth north of £500,000. So I'm going to just look at the back end and explain why the profiling, I can almost tell who's done the conversion by the profile of the rear wings, because where the 3 planes meet, the back, the top, the side, the curve and the tumble home and the crease are actually in slightly different places. So not only can I differentiate a factory Spider, but I can also sort of tell who's done the work on it. So we'll have a look at that, and then we'll start to diagnose the engine running problem. Because when these things are right, they absolutely sing. Well, this is the important area I'm talking about here, the interface between this plane, that plane, and that plane. And this is better than most, actually. But the original factory Daytona Spiders had slightly more tumble down here. So this point, this three surface point, was just slightly lower by about 3 millimeters. This is still a credible effort. I've seen a lot worse than this. Some of them are like that. I suspect this was probably done by Strayman, or Autocraft, one or the other. But this junction is very critical on chop-top Daytonas, and people hardly ever get it right. But we'll forgive it that, because I'm in love with it anyway. Well, this is classic Ferrari in a way at its finest, because you've got, as I was talking about earlier, the definitive architecture really. 6 carburetors in a row under here, a whole barrage of them in a line with 2 chokes, each carburetor for a V12, 1 per cylinder. And then the mixture comes out of these. This is the inlet camshaft here, driven by a chain with a gear either side here. Because on the lower spec model equivalents of this engine, such as the 400, 412, 365, GT, it was a chain that went round the whole lot. But because of the greater inertia and the fact that this car picks up more quickly than they do, a lot more quickly, which puts more stress on the timing chain as it accelerates and decelerates, the chain goes round one gear in the middle here, and one gear, and then it has gear-driven cams to make it super hardy under very, very sudden throttle responses. And this car does pick up. You touch the throttle and it's off. So you've got the inlet camshaft here operating the valves underneath that allow the mixture into the cylinders. Spark plug ignites combusts the mixture, and then you've got this camshaft here, which is on the exhaust side, and the exhaust gases flow down through the headers or manifolds along and underneath and away from the car. It's absolutely classical Ferrari, this, at its best. But the engine is not running on 12 cylinders, so I'm going to use a little bit of modern technology. I'll keep this super simple, and I'm going to actually find out which cylinders are not working, because I think it's working on probably 10 cylinders, something like that. So there's a heat shield here on the exhaust manifold. I'm going to take that off to gain access to the headers, and we'll just use a laser temperature gun to see which cylinders are working and which aren't. Easy peasy. And I'll do the same on the other side as well. So we've got access to all 12 pipes. There we are. And this one actually comes off a lot more easy than the other side. So there we go. A bit more access. Right, I'm going to start the engine up now, and I'm going to use my trusty heat gun to see which cylinders are working and which aren't. Before I do start this, it's worth mentioning Daytonas should sound like a bag of spanners when they're right. They sound even more like a bag of spanners when they're not, but even when this engine is fully tuned up, it should sound pretty awful. It should sound clattery and unpleasant and unhappy, and that's the way they are. You get, because of the long timing chain going around the engine, not as long as it is on the others, as I've explained, you get referred noise through all these tappets here and through the distributor. You get a clattering effect because the valve clearances, Ferrari specified they were quite wide on this car. Just to get nerdy, it's 0.25 millimeters for inlet and 0.5 for exhaust, or 0.45, sorry. And the cams are quite harsh, so they clatter. They make a clattering noise as they hit the tappets as they start to open the valves. So this is set to standard factory valve clearances, which is why it's noisy. But quite often, people adjust the valve clearances. They make the gap a little narrower, down to 0.15, 0.2 mil, and about 0.3, 0.35, and it quietens the engine down drastically. But if you were driving at the stated 174 miles an hour, there's a chance the exhaust valves could actually burn because they're not being allowed to be closed for long enough for the heat to sink into the cylinder head. I digress. Let's have a look at let's get this running on 12 and be on our way. Yeah, you can hear the misfire. You can feel it lumpy through the exhaust. Shouldn't be like that. So we'll do this side first. Well, 57 degrees, 36 degrees, 91 degrees, they're all over the place. 66 degrees, 73. $15. Okay, so that one's all right. 91, 41. No, not happy. So that's number 5. These are all over the place. So we got the back one is not working. Neither's that one. That one is. That one is. 100 and odd degrees. Yeah. So we got the back 2 not working here. So what I'm going to do now is use my chicken pliers. This is a technique I've learned some years ago to actually disconnect the plug lead, which probably won't make any difference to the way the engine is running. Just being super careful with this. Yeah, no difference. Now if I offer this up to the plug, just there like that, so that the spark has to jump onto the plug, sometimes you can bring them back to life. Because I'm loath to change spark plugs, because every time you change the plugs, it slightly wears the threads, slightly tiny amount, eats away the thread on the in the cylinder head. So I try to rescue spark plugs. So on this side, the back one is not working again. Don't try this at home. No. This is not bringing these back to life the way I would like. Number 2 was suspect as well. I suspect there's another reason. No, I'm not happy with these. They're working, but they're not. I'm going to do a little more investigating. These will be hot. Oops. Well, I can see what the problem here is. The spark plug is actually the wrong plug for this engine. So these have been fitted by somebody who basically, I'm afraid, wasn't up to speed with how they should be. BP8ES. This is an NGK spark plug. I like NGK plugs, and the 8 is the important number here. That is the heat range of the spark plug. So these should have BP6s or BP7s in. The BP8 is a very cool running plug, so the tip is actually kept cooler by the way the spark plug is designed than it is on the lesser heat range plugs. So a BP6ES, the tip of the spark plug would actually be kept warmer. It would not be cooled as much by the nose of the plug, and therefore it doesn't foul up as easily. The spark is hotter, for want of a better way of putting it. These are great if you're tearing down the Autobahn at 170 miles an hour, because they're running a bit cooler, the engine will be running a bit hotter, and they will sort of equal themselves out and you get a nice spark. But if you're pottering around town and driving this every day, those are the wrong spark plugs. They're too cold, those plugs. So I'm going to put a set of BP6ESs in it, and that should make the world of difference to the way this drives, this car. Fortunately, we have them in stock, BP6ES. There we go. And I'll just check the gap on this. which is actually beautifully pre-gapped, and we'll just narrow it down a little bit. That's it. Feeler gauge should just go in there and no more. And I always hand start spark plugs. On an engine, and any engine, you should always hand start the plug in the threads so that you don't cross thread it, because that's the first, one of the best ways to kill an aluminium cylinder head. So we just gently, I can feel that that plug is going home very nicely, just spinning beautifully, and it's reached the crushable washer. They have a crushable washer to seal them, so I give it another little bit with that dunk, just to nip them off and no more. A lot of people make the mistake of not tightening spark plugs enough and it doesn't crush the washer. That's just nice. Beautiful. So I'll carry on changing all of these and then we'll take the car for a run.
Here we are out on the open road, and it's of all the cars in all the world, this creates such emotive energy for me, because I think it was 1976 the movie The Gumball Rally came out, and it was just for me it was overload, sensory overload. It had an AC Cobra in it, but it also had a one of these, a Ferrari Daytona Spider, a real 365 GTS 4, and it was it was fantastic to see Raul Julia driving that car. He famously ripped the rearview mirror off and said, you know, what is behind doesn't matter. What is in front is what matters. And who am I to complain or correct him? So I'm just warming this beast through. It's the funny thing about Daytonas is Daytonas are wonderful things, but the steering on a Daytona is very critical, as is everything. They're one of those cars, they're a bit like a Tanqueray type. They are either right or they're wrong. And most people drive their Daytonas and think they're right, and they absolutely are not. One example of that is the steering, because the steering is a very old-fashioned design. It's a recirculating ball steering pump, non-power assisted, and there are a lot of joints in the steering. I don't know, 10, 12, something like that, joints in the whole steering, and it only needs play in them to start making the whole thing get thrown out of kilter or less than perfect. And it only takes a ball joint or two to be sticky and tight to make the steering feel even heavier than it should do. So one thing I constantly watch when we get Daytonas in for work is how tight does the steering feel? How accurate does it feel? They're not light, but a lot of people blame weightiness on them for the different sort of compromises or faults that there are with the power steering. So we'll just warm this through gently, and then once the T's and P's are up, the oil pressure is great, that's where it should be. The temperature is still a bit low, so I'm just going to wait for those to warm up, and then we'll unleash those 352 brake forces. Well, it's amazing. One can tell if a V12 is on 10 or 11 cylinders, it is very obvious to me. But this is finally on 12, and the throttle response is so instant. You're opening the taps, but you're you're also getting enough fuel in there. The fuel is very much more approximate than a modern fuel-injected engine, and even Ferrari make the fueling curve slightly leaner than for the amount of air going into the engine. It's just a way of keeping a bit of power back. But this ladles it in. I'm not saying it's rich, but it just, you open the throttle and it goes, throw loads of petrol in. And the result is amazing, instant acceleration. It's the throttle response is absolutely instantaneous. It's one of the wonderful facets of this car, actually, and Ferraris of this era and Lamborghinis. So we've got some temperature now in the oil and the water. So let's open the taps and get this baby breathing. Oh, mamma mia! Absolutely incredible. You press the throttle down and the sheer power of the engine opens lifts the front of the car right off its ride height. And just absolute grunt. Amazing. Beautiful. So much better for being on 12 cylinders, at the risk of stating the obvious. This is just a joy to drive. I'm going to alter my listing on this car. Actually, it's gone from in my top 20 to my top 3. Absolutely incredible. It looks beautiful. It speaks to you standing still, this car. It says, love me, admire my beauty, then you do this, and it takes on a whole different character.
Concludes another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop video. If you enjoyed it half as much as I did, then I enjoyed it twice as much as you. And we'll be back with something else very soon.